touching upon this issue across different lectures. And the issue is foreign direct investment, multinational corporations. What do they do in developing countries? What can they do in the Caribbean countries? And we all know that multinational corporations are very present in the Caribbean countries. And they've been here for many years. You know the theory of development by invitation, whereby governments of the region used to invite multinational corporations to come over and carry out the investment and bring in the technology, the machinery, equipment necessary to, in some cases even the manpower necessary to carry out production. And this led to the building and the setup of different industrial parks and industrial zones that were meant to provide the necessary room for investors to contribute to the development of these islands that tended to be little populated without major natural resources to exploit. And they needed the intervention of foreign actors to help boost development. Let us see to what extent these are the references you have in the list of preferences. Let me give you a couple of slides providing you with the evidence. These are figures on FDI, foreign direct investment, FDI. We will define it in a couple of slides exactly, but you know, the amount of investments carried out of foreign corporations in a country. The stocks as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product. An average of the last 20 years. These are figures from UNCTAD. UNCTAD, the United Nations Commission for Trade and Development, is the UN commission that is specialized in studying foreign direct investment and multinational corporations and providing governments with technical advice on how to deal with multinational corporations. And they have a number of reports. They produce a yearly report on foreign direct investment, World Investment Report, that I strongly advise you to look at because it's a constant source of information and update on also on the nitty-gritty of foreign investment, the regulations and the laws governing investment approach. These are stocks as a percentage of GDP. This gives you an idea of the stock of investment, of accumulated investment, as a percentage of yearly production in a number of countries. You will see most of your countries here. And the bars, the different colors of the bars indicate different years. 1990, I actually took, casually, I didn't compute any average or anything, but just, with the figure for 1990 and for 1995. And these figures tend to be rather structural. They don't change very much one year after the other because they refer to the stocks, so to the accumulated amount of investments over time. And the GDP is a little bit more volatile, as we all know, but the overall these figures tend to be structural. And you see, the first thing you notice, what is the first thing you notice here? Any comment or any idea?
Well, the smaller Caribbean countries would have a higher investment in GDP.
The bars for the smaller Caribbean countries are very high. The bars for the larger Caribbean countries, the Trinidad and Tobago, for example, are still very high. Jamaica. They're more than twice as much as the average for the developing economies. I drew this horizontal red bar to give you an indication of the average for the developing economies. That is very similar to the average for the developed economies in the last year available. It's not very different worldwide. And you see, relative to this world average or developing countries average, you see the differences. Multiples, 3-4 times the average. So this...
But that's a percentage of GDP.
Yes.
And not in absolute numbers, because in absolute numbers, developing countries invest more in one than else.
Very true, very true. I mean, these are not values, these are percentages. And in terms of absolute values, China is the largest recipient and one of the largest investors. And the US is one of the largest investors as well as the recipient, and so on. Of course, we're not talking about absolute values, taking into account the small size of most of the Caribbean states. And but this gives you an idea of the relevance. I mean, in several of the countries in the region, the amount of accumulated foreign investments in the country amounts to 4 times or 5 times the yearly GDP. It's huge. And of course, I mean, the larger the countries are, the smaller these numbers, these percentages are, like Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago, and the smaller islands tend to have larger percentages, but still, I mean, the point I'm making here is that FDI matters a lot for your countries. And another similar figure that looks at another way of looking at the relevance of FDI. That is, this time FDI inflows, so it's yearly figures, how much comes in a given year as a percentage of gross fixed capital formation, which is a proxy for investment. How much of the investment carried out in a country relies on or is carried out by a foreign actor? What percentage is it? And again, the red bar is the average for developing economies for 2010. And look at the bars. Again, large shares of investment in your countries relies on foreign actors coming in and investing, carrying out investment. So my point is, this is a key issue. Your governments, you yourselves coming from different government entities or academics know that it's very strategic to know exactly what to do with foreign investors and how to make the most out of these investments.
I think that's the issue, and Morgan is something to that. Because yes, there is a strategic move by the government to attract foreign investment, but I think where we fall short is, for example, with Singapore, they attracted MNCs, but they had a plan as to what they were going to extract from those MNCs towards the development of their country. And I don't think we seem to have tapped that issue, well, for Barbados that is. How much are you going, what's in it for us? After you invested, one is tapping to ensure that you don't repatriate all your profits out of the country and get nothing out of it, or that you set up these, what I call flexible companies, so there's no capital formation or infrastructure development, or that there's no knowledge transfer, or even technology transfer, or that you're not hiring local labor, etc. But I think that's a very important point for Caribbean economy. So yes, it is a strategic and important move, but how do we capitalize on it for development?
I'm very glad that this is a very appropriate comment, and this is actually my conclusion. So you jump to 1 hour ahead and saying, what I'll be saying is that FDI attraction is important, but it's not the main or the only thing. One needs to know exactly what to do and what one would like to do and have FDI do for the country.
I actually have a question for Olivia, because while she says that, there's also the fact that Barbados practically leads the region in terms of, or one of the leading countries in terms of, if you look at the financial, if you're looking at financial services, the fact that you have a lot of financial institutions that has developed capacity, that has contributed to your productivity for the country as well. And so even though, let's say as a region, we have not necessarily took that approach, I would say to some extent Barbados is an example of that happening. Would you say that too, Olivia?
Doesn't look convinced, but
Well,
show your face. Yeah.
yes and no. So yes, there has been a strategic move by the government to attract foreign investment, but I don't think that we have gained as much as we possibly could out of the relationship. And I think that needs to be better managed on the part of the government when we're negotiating who comes in, the industries they come into, and the transfer that takes place from them being resident of the country.
Does any of you work in investment attraction agency or in a unit of a ministry in charge of attracting investment?
You do. Okay.
There's another point I'd like to add is also the quality of the foreign direct investment. Because, well, speaking from a Jamaican perspective, where some of the institutional framework is weak, you find that some of the investment that do come into the country are investments that nobody else wants. Because there are so many weaknesses in the regulatory framework, they can invest and make the foreign investors can invest and make a large profit at the expense of the local industries because the regulatory framework is weak. If they were to operate at, say, international standard and implement best practices, they would not be able to make a profit, and hence the country would not have been an attractive financial investment area.
Let me ask you a question.
What would you consider a quality FDI, or high quality FDI?
Especially investments that contribute, that allows for the fusion of technology, the fusion of knowledge, where the MNCs are good corporate citizens, where they actually participate in facilitating economic development in terms of having the capacity to build relations with the domestic governments to say that these are some of the best practices in where we're coming from, and we want to see these practices integrated in how we do business in the local economy. So that is the sort of background that I'm coming from.
You see examples of this sort in the region? Quality, yeah. Well, we'll come back to this afterwards. We'll come back to this. Let me start by giving you a little bit of the outline of the talk and a little bit of the terminology. I'll try to tell you what, according to the literature, MNS, multinational corporations, and FDI are. Briefly give an overview of government's attitudes towards FDI and MNC. A short explanation of why a firm becomes an MNC and the kind of strategies that MNC do and follow to invest abroad. And then ask the key question: why do we matter? Why are we talking about FDI in a course on the design and implementation of innovation policies? The key answer lays in that sentence there, wondering to what extent multinational corporations allow the transfer of technology and therefore the acquisition of new capabilities that will in turn benefit the economy. And the key concepts are listed here. the idea of spillovers, the idea of technological capabilities, and how local firms can strengthen that technological capabilities thanks to a number of things, including the access to FDI, what national policies can do, and so on. What do you think a multinational corporation is? Here you find some simple definitions. A corporation that has its facilities and other assets in at least one country other than its home country. And these companies tend to have different models of organization, as we'll see later, but they tend to have headquarters and then a number of subsidiaries in different countries. They have very large budgets. We've seen the numbers. We've seen the amount of investment stocks in the Caribbean surpasses by a large extent the amount of GDP in several countries. And well, sometimes the literature talks about transnational corporations or multinational corporations. There might be slight differences, but essentially they refer to the same idea. This company is Philips, headquarters in Holland, and subsidiaries of all sorts in a number of countries. I didn't check whether here is Latin America, El Salvador, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, and so on, Europe, Southern Europe, Asia, Middle East, South Asia, Africa. So it's a huge network. Here, this is portrayed in a rather simplified way, whereby the headquarters entertains most of the relationships with all the subsidiaries, but in fact, there might be more important subsidiaries that actually manage the relationships with a number of other companies in the different countries, like in the case of Japan, the case of Thailand and Malaysia to some extent, and so on. And how does FDI occur? Again, there's a variety of different ways FDI takes place. The easiest, the simplest to visualize is the so-called greenfield investment, a new operation set up in a country, different from the home country. But there is also what is generally called a brownfield investment, that is an expansion or reinvestment in existing foreign affiliates or sites. So a company taking over an affiliate that belonged to a different company or perhaps a local company and reinvesting and restructuring, putting more assets and investment into this facility, all through mergers and acquisitions. So buying companies abroad or merging with companies abroad. And privatization and equity investment is another form whereby governments decide to privatize and divest part of their assets, and foreign companies come in, invest, and become the owners of these new facilities. Or new forms of investment that do not necessarily involve equity investments, but certainly involve opening to relationships and transactions, and partly managing and sometimes controlling the operations of different companies, like joint ventures, strategic alliances, licensing, franchising. We could even include global value chains to some extent, so far as they are ruled by the agreements and the contracts between a buyer and a supplier, a set of suppliers. And this last form of international presence and international penetration of companies into distant countries is growing immensely. The set of rules and the codes of laws and regulations governing these kind of investments and these kind of agreements is expanding by the day, and you should see the contracts ruling FDI of this sort or international presence of foreign companies of this sort tend to be longer and longer with a number of details and codes and specifics. So equity investment is perhaps becoming less necessary, but international presence of multinational corporations is not falling over time. And governments have been having different attitudes over the years. The story here tends to be country specific, but there have been some passion over time in the last 50 years, where initially, more or less during the 70s, governments tended to be a little bit suspicious. They thought that foreign investors would create monopolies, would exploit rents, would not contribute to development, and there was a political sensitivity towards FDI, where these assets, these newly created assets, would not belong to the country, would not belong to national entrepreneurs, and therefore it would have been better to be rather suspicious and rather close doors. After a little while, in the 80s and the 90s, governments started to open up. They realized that foreign investment could bring some advantages, and there was again another fashion that was contradicting the previous one, opening up to foreign investors. Many host economies reduce barriers to foreign investment. Many industrializing countries, see the example of Singapore this morning, lowered barriers and built infrastructures and rules to host and attract more foreign investors. In some cases, governments have also transferred considerable resources to multinational corporations. One example is Brazil, that for a number of years has been subsidizing the entry of foreign investors into the country, but many other examples can be given of countries attracting in different forms investors. Why do firms become multinational? There's a long literature. I don't know how familiar you are with this. This is a literature that is typically taught in international business courses, in business schools or economics faculties, where different people, Goschel is one of the main scholars working on multinational corporations and what the origins of multinational corporations are. And to make a very brief summary, there can be essentially three main reasons why a company may become a multinational company, and they all respond to the imperative of becoming competitive, strengthening the sources of competitive advantage that these companies have. First one refers to national differences and exploiting the differences that companies can find in other countries. Secondly, exploiting scale economies, and finally, scope economies. First reason is that companies can find different conditions and different factor endowments across countries. So they would tend to invest and locate their subsidiary in the country that is providing them with the largest amount of resources that are most needed to that specific set of production activity. So each activity is located in a country which has the lowest cost for the factor that this activity uses most intensively. Land in Honduras, cheap labor force in China, or Mexico, in the examples we were looking at yesterday, thinking about blue jeans, or cheap but skilled engineers in India, or the existence of natural resources. that is leading foreign corporations to invest in some of the Caribbean countries, namely Trinidad and Tobago and others. Or, exploiting the resource or the factor that is most available in a country. Award awarding is in order here because endowments change. And countries can help build different endowments. India did not have as many skilled engineers in the past as it has now. And this is a result of conscious investment into higher education that is now attracting foreign corporations investing in the specific sectors or segments of value chains that require most intensively skilled engineers. So this is a dynamic process. This changes. And endowments can be built. It can attract different forms of investment, different forms and different kinds of multinational corporations. Perhaps foreign investments of a higher quality, as our friend here was reminding us. The second reason why a firm may become multinational is related to the idea of economies of scale. So having a larger market implies producing larger scale, and by producing a larger scale you reduce unit cost or average cost, and therefore your overall efficiency as a multinational company improves. And so it's important to expand to several markets, produce larger quantities of product, and by producing larger quantities of product you can also induce learning effects. The idea of learning by doing, the idea of doing the same thing several times, producing larger quantities enables you with opportunities to learn. Of course, learning is not automatic. We're seeing in the lectures during this week that learning is never automatic, innovation is never automatic. The old idea of innovation as manna from heaven doesn't really apply, except for very few exceptions. Innovation is the result of conscious efforts carried out by firms and specific actors that operate in systems that engage into relations with many other different actors. And the system itself helps remedying market failures and systemic failures and help the innovation process to take place. And the third reason why firms may become multinational corporations is scope economies. The simple economics of scope economies is summarized here. When the cost of the joint production of two or more products can be less than producing them separately. So it's better to produce a larger variety of products because overall the cost of producing different goods jointly reduces the overall costs. And scope economies can be achieved through shared equipment, brands, other assets. So the same equipment can be used for a larger variety of products, and the unit cost of each product would fall. Or through, most importantly, shared knowledge. So you invest in acquiring a specific kind of knowledge that you think can be used for the production of one good, and you realize that the same knowledge can be applied to a variety of goods. And by producing a variety of goods, you gain economies of scope. And this can be achieved by firms, and by firms investing internationally and becoming multinational corporations. And the strategies behind the multinational corporations willing to invest abroad follow different patterns. A famous author in this field is John Dunning, the late John Dunning, who built a theory of multinational corporations and what multinational corporations seek in their activities. And he produced this simplified description of the reasons why multinational corporations strategically invest abroad, seeking for natural resources, efficiency, markets, and capability. And let me briefly give you some examples of First, natural resource seeking investments. Think of examples of natural resource seeking investments from your own countries. I mentioned the Trinidad oil and gas investments, but I'm sure there are others where foreign companies decide to invest abroad and seek to exploit the locally developed natural resources. Or, second reason, seeking efficiency, seeking cheap labor force, fiscal incentives. The maquila operations in Mexico, the Torreon example I was giving you yesterday. By using lower cost, skilled workers, companies can improve efficiency. And they therefore invest abroad in seeking for higher efficiency. Low cost and labor intensive manufacturing in most of Asian countries, as well as in many Central American countries where maquila operations and stitching jeans and selling them back to the US has been in fashion for many years. Now it has probably dropped a little bit due to competition from new entrants into the global business of garment productions from Northern Africa, from South India, Bangladesh, and several other countries. But that's one of the reasons why multinational corporations expand their activities abroad. Or they might invest abroad to seek for markets. Think of the large telecom producers that have been acquiring telecom companies in Brazil. Brazil has a market of 250 million, 200 million potential consumers willing to buy mobile phones and telecom services. You will notice that most of the large telecom companies are either Italian or Spanish or US companies seeking for markets. Telecom.
Yes, my colleague and I were just exchanging notes that free zones and sweatshops are probably two examples between Jamaica and probably a couple other islands that FDIs supposedly, but they don't really add anything to our economies. In fact, they exploit us as well as, say, Mexico or other developing countries.
Would you make a general case that free zones? Would you make a general case that free zones are low quality investments? Because I see it. I like very much your comment, but I think that sweatshops are definitely sort of what I would call a low quality FDI, low spillover and investment and development potential FDI, whereas free zones might attract different kinds of investment, provided that governments and local firms do something else.
Well, my experience with free zones from the Jamaica example is, honestly speaking, no. They long hours, they are at low levels of employment, mainly women. There is no transfer of technology, of skills, no, not even management is local. But again, I'm just being very specific to my Jamaica experience of free zones.
Thank you.
I think that is all contextual, and it is all about what you are prepared to take responsibility for and what you're prepared to leave to simply happen. I think if a country is in a situation where you have a very large unemployment problem and the unemployment is at the level of the unskilled and the country itself is unable to generate employment, then certainly there is a role for that. It is the failure of the country if it fails to see this as a short-term measure, and even as it provides this short gap type of initiative. It puts things in place to move beyond that, as we have seen in other places. We have seen, in East Asia, for example, where that has in fact happened. You started there, and then you simply strategically, through directed policy, move beyond that. I think in the region, it is unfair for us to say that, FDI has just come and exploited our regions, and we have not benefited from it, because that in fact is not so. We're by and large been a capital poor region, and if you have the absence of a major resource that you need in order to generate employment, generate foreign exchange, export, etc., you have to find a mechanism, as we saw Singapore has in fact done. Again, the fact that we have failed to match new and different policies to change the direction of FDI is our own fault, and we have to be prepared to take responsibility for that. I think one place where it can be argued that FDI has served tremendously well, and still we can criticize, is in the case of Trinidad and Tobago. Our oil and gas sector, which is by global standard a competitive cluster, has been dominated by foreign direct investment. And in fact, we have, through our education system, through direct government policy, we now have domestic investors operating in that particular sector. There obviously have been the benefits of the requirement of the sector for skilled labor in engineering, etc. So we have a lot of our university graduates going into that sector. On the other hand, we've had a disadvantage of your other sectors which are not growing, but where this sector is driving the wage rate up. And what you have happening is that the other sectors now benchmark against that. So you don't necessarily have the productivity that you have in that sector, but you have the wage rate overall kind of being pushed up. But again, it's about the failure to diversify, to use the significant surpluses that we have enjoyed, and we still continue to enjoy, to be able to diversify into other sectors that can generate the kinds of opportunities that's happening.
Thank you very much for the comment. What I learned is that it really matters whether the FDI fulfills the strategy of the country. The country may have different strategies, they may be seeking for investors, and it's important that these foreign investors are consistent with what the development strategy of the country is. And another reason why firms become multinational and pursue a strategy to operate in different markets is when they try to seek the capabilities, try to seek the technical expertise that the different countries may offer. It's the case of Bangalore, where a lot of ICT manufacturers as well as service producers operate. Well, so we started discussing FDI, what FDI is, what multinational corporations are, why firms become multinational. We're scratching the surface of why it matters, why countries should develop their own strategies and attract different kinds of multinationals and interact with them. One key issue that economists, development, business scholars have been working on is knowledge and knowledge transfer, and how and to what extent foreign investors and multinational corporations make knowledge accessible and actually transfer knowledge to local companies. Economists would frame this issue in terms of the concept of spillovers. So the idea is that foreign companies tend to be more efficient, tend to have a superior efficiency than local firms, and this superior efficiency and this better productivity can spill over to locally owned firms in their industries, or their industries within the regions or related industries. And of course, economists also look at the other side of the coin, that is whether and to what extent multinational corporations displace local enterprises by using intensively production factors that other companies could use. And spillovers, as all of us who studied some economics know, can be positive as well as negative. Positive spillovers when the increase of foreign investment in an industry leads to an increase in productivity of domestic firms, the same industry or in related industries. And we talk and we write about horizontal or vertical spillovers, or negative spillovers when a foreign investment produces a decrease in the productivity of domestic firms. And examples of positive spillovers are listed here. So local firms can, for example, copy the operations of the foreign-owned firms. So they can learn good practices, see how a foreign firm addresses a specific challenge, how it improves productivity in different forms, how it packages or ships or transport different products, how it finances its activities, and learn from foreign-owned companies. Or they can be simply forced by competition from foreign firms to raise efficiency to survive. Sometimes there's this shake-up of a foreign competitor that obliges local companies to devote efforts to find ways to be more productive and efficient is necessary. It's a wake-up call, especially when local companies have been operating and protective barriers, developing monopoly rents and niches, and the entry of a foreign competitor can force them to improve their practices and efficiency. Or foreign firms may help qualifying and improving the skills of local human resources. So they can directly train local human resources. And this is related to the following point, the labor turnover. The technical people, the technical officers trained by a multinational corporation or perhaps employed by a multinational corporation in the country that then move to a local company or eventually set up their own new activity and start up a new firm. This is something that's been happening a lot, for example, in Costa Rica, following the large investment of Intel that employed and keeps training a number of scientists and engineers, and many of them went out of the company and set up their own little or medium-sized firm, providing services to Intel itself, or by exploiting the learning they acquired by working with the large multinational corporation, selling on their own and venturing into business. Or another major avenue for positive spillovers refers to the transfer of knowledge that is made possible through backward linkages. The same Intel that is buying from local companies, intermediate components, services, software services, ICT, and so on. And through this interaction, local firms may learn, and the interaction may generate positive spillovers on their productivity and efficiency. But of course, there can be negative spillovers that have to do with multinational corporations having superior technologies, higher productivity, managing to sell better quality products at lower prices, which is good for local consumers, which can be bad for local firms that face strong competition and may be forced to get out of the market due to this increased competitive pressure. The positive competitive pressure I was mentioning before can be excessive, can be sometimes unfair if multinational corporations enjoy monopoly niches.
Level playing field between them
that's even worse, right? When government intentionally tilts the competitive floor in favor of foreign corporations and therefore penalizing local companies. It can be a form of negative spillover for local companies. And a number of studies have been attempted to test econometrically, statistically, with case studies and so on, whether FDI inflows have a positive effect on local firms' development. I'm not going into this literature, but there's a very extended literature on country analysis with very complex data and techniques looking into the evidence. If I were to summarize and give you 3 reasons why the effects of FDI can be positive or negative, depending on different country circumstances, the 3 key areas I would focus on would be what happens with local firms and the technological capabilities of local firms, what happens with the behavior of multinational corporation subsidiaries. It's not true that any subsidiary would have the same effect. Different subsidiaries may have different strategies, different business behavior and innovative behavior, and they may in turn contribute to a different extent to local economic development. And thirdly, national policies. And well, the story of capabilities of domestic firms is very much related to what we're discussing, we're learning over this week. The idea that innovation and economic development are closely related. We're studying innovation not for its own sake, but for the impact that innovation can have on economic development and well-being. And the ideas put forward by, among others, Paul Romer, that try to explain different strategies for economic development, separating the functions carried out by those producing ideas and those using ideas, and stressing the relevance of producing ideas, notwithstanding the relevance of using efficiently and productively ideas produced by others. And the big question of whether developing countries should rely on foreign technologies. I mean, in developing study there has been a very long debate known as appropriate technology and choice of technology. And in the 60s and the 70s, foreign technologies were imported to African countries, and local companies were forced to use technology that was not familiar to them, that was not appropriate to them. There was sometimes required excessive use of machinery. Of course, producing the same shirt in Mozambique or in United States would require different technologies. And using the same technology that a southern United States company would employ in Mozambique would make a difference, and it would not probably be appropriate for the local conditions. But the key concept, Eddie Zirmay was mentioning it yesterday, and during several lectures, we stressed this idea of absorptive capacity. So the need that local firms have to enjoy the absorptive capacity that allows them to exploit the potential offered by these spillovers created by multinational corporations. And the work published by Cohen and Leventhal in 1990 and later on in several other papers and studies emphasizes that research and development and innovation is very relevant not only for innovation itself and producing new products or introducing new processes, but it's also very relevant to absorb the knowledge and become good users of knowledge produced by others. So, in terms of our discussion now, provided that multinational corporations offer different knowledge to local firms need to have, or if they don't have it, develop their own absorbing capacity. And to do that, they need to invest in human resources, in innovation and research and development. This is necessary to make the potential offered by the spillovers concrete and relevant and useful for local enterprises development. Well, this summarizes somehow what I explained. There are different components that explain absorption capacity at the firm level, at the sector level, the infrastructure that allows firms to invest and develop their own absorption capacity, with formal and informal institutions and so on. So different components of the system that help local firms acquire the necessary absorption capacity. A minimum level of science and technology knowledge is required to use innovation. So even in presence of very advanced and very high quality foreign direct investment, if local firms do not have the minimum science and technology and innovation endowments and capacity, they wouldn't be able to exploit this opportunity. So there's a job to do internally, domestically, to help develop these capacities at the firm level. A second major area of analysis and major area of attention should look at what multinational corporations' subsidiaries do in developing countries. Perhaps again this reference to the idea of quality, higher or lower quality investment and subsidiary is very relevant. The standard portrait of multinational corporations is that headquarters have all the knowledge, carry out all the research and development, and the subsidiaries just use the knowledge produced elsewhere. But recent research has shown that this is not the case. The conventional model of the economies was that there was a headquarter in charge of centralized research and development activities, and then different subsidiaries that were chosen according to the opportunities offered by each country. So, I don't know, Brazil for the large local market, Korea for the engineering skills they have, Argentina for the advanced competency in agriculture and natural resources activities. So this multinational corporation would carry out research and development at home and then manufacture or exploit the factors available in the different countries according to the strategies we briefly commented before. And then its subsidiary would be in charge of organizing eventually its own relationships with the local economy. A newer view that tends to be more familiar with international business scholars tend to look at subsidiaries, multinational corporation subsidiaries, not anymore as passive receivers of knowledge developed elsewhere, but as active developers of knowledge. The relationship within the headquarters and the subsidiaries wouldn't be hierarchical. Some subsidiaries may be more active than others. And research and development is sometimes carried out in subsidiaries in developing countries as well. So it's not anymore the headquarters and then antennas receiving the knowledge developed elsewhere with no effort to develop new techniques and new products locally. And by the way, among the references, I don't think we'll have time to get into this case now, but there is a case of an Argentinian example where the role of subsidiaries was very relevant in explaining what extent FDI spillovers were actually materialized in Argentina. So it actually made the difference whether subsidiaries had a more active, innovative role rather than just acting as receivers of knowledge produced elsewhere. And this new model would be, having a headquarter, but at the same time subsidiaries that are related among themselves, that develop their own network of linkages, and that tend to be more active and innovative in different ways. Let me quickly go over this. You'll see the details in the slides, the different models of subsidiaries in different countries. The third major factor is national policies. What can governments do? And why should governments intervene in this business? Is there a need for governments to promote actively the creation and deepening of linkages? The rationale is again that of market failures and systemic failures, the lack of coordination among the different actors. Markets may fail to create efficient linkages. They may raise the cost to both parties of entering into long-term supply relationships. They may reduce the ability of domestic firms to become competitive suppliers. And different policies have been experimented and used and are being used in different countries to promote local linkages. It would be useful for you to think in terms of your own country and explore and ask yourself which of these policies, which of these specific instruments your countries are using to deal with multinational corporations. There is one area of government intervention that has to do with input tariffs. And the idea was that by protecting local companies from imports, you force multinational corporations to source locally their intermediate inputs and therefore replace imports instead of buying from abroad, buying locally. And the policies of the current Argentinian government is emphasizing this idea of buying local. The import substitution industrialization strategies in many examples failed. I don't know about your countries whether and to what extent there are some provisions favoring local sourcing of multinational corporations. A different way of pursuing similar result is by looking at local content requirements, imposing multinational corporations to buy locally a given percentage of what they buy. And this is happening, for example, in Brazil. There has been attracting foreign corporations and large assemblers, and the largest input producers for the production of the iPhones and the Samsung and the Apple different devices. They attracted the first-tier contractors, and they are imposing on them very stringent local content requirements. And they're subsidizing their investment in innovation efforts as well. So with an effort to put the rules in place, and at the same time help firms to comply with the rules by easing their investment in innovation and training and human capital and so on. Of course, this Brazilian example hinges on the large market of the Brazilian consumers market for electronics and smartphones and so on. So the government could bargain with these large electronics companies, provide them access to the market, force them to local source a percentage of their inputs in exchange for the promise to sell 200 million smartphones in the next 3 years. Of course, the smaller countries should devise different strategies, or should, make the best use of their bargaining skills and what they have to offer in exchange for entry of these large multinational corporations into the country. Of course, a related story has to do with helping local firms build their capabilities and better interact with multinational corporations and better learn and exploit the knowledge that is made available by these corporations. So the upgrading of domestic suppliers. I mean, Korea has not been welcoming foreign investors for many years. They impose very stringent conditions on foreign investors, and imposing, and the same happened to some extent to Singapore, forcing multinational corporations to invest locally in human capital and training. So Intel in Singapore has created a huge training for scientists and engineers that is producing 200 engineers a year, entirely financed by Intel, as a condition to enter the market and operate from Singapore. Or the R&D investments in the host economy as a performance requirement. So foreign affiliates need to invest in research and development to justify their existence, to buy for their existence in the market. So there's a number of policy tools that can be implemented. This is very long, but let me finish with a question mark that has to do with a question to all of us. To what extent is there still a policy space for this kind of instruments? The WTO is imposing, as you all know, a number of conditions. So a number of the policies that the Koreas and the Singapores of this world implemented 50 years ago are not allowed in the same fashion today. Other policies can be devised. I know that several of your countries have teams of lawyers and international lawyers exploring to what extent different policy measures are WTO compatible, and whether local governments can do something to help spillovers materialize and local industry and local service firms develop. That's a new area, that's a new challenging area that limits and changes the scope for active development policy.